Greetings, my name is Veronika Veremieva. Ukraine has struck with its own ballistic missile. The missile flew almost 300 kilometers and destroyed a Russian command post. The enemy is already just 20 kilometers from Sumy. People are being urged to evacuate immediately. Trump shifted the blame onto Ukraine, claiming that we provoked the Russian shelling, and Zelensky responded harshly. Russia is lying, saying it did not abduct Ukrainian children, and is accusing Ukraine of disrupting the exchange of bodies and prisoners. In Estonia, a new level of hybrid warfare has emerged. Russians are broadcasting obscenities on the facade of a building. And now, some truly good news. In May, Ukraine conducted an extremely successful test of its own ballistic missile. It covered almost 300 kilometers and destroyed the Russian command post. This was announced by Valentin Badrak, director of the Center for Army Conversion and Disarmament Studies.
I don't know how many missiles we can expect per month or per year. I think production will ramp up significantly because the warhead of this missile is over 400 kilograms, and that's a very powerful arsenal. For comparison, the new American ballistic missile has a warhead of only 91 kilograms. It's clear that this will be a powerful weapon for us. I hope that we will keep moving forward. The main thing is to scale up quickly and very logically.
The expert noted that Ukraine has properly administered this missile program since July 2024. The project is overseen by the relevant Deputy Minister of Defense, General Anatoly Klochko. The Ministry of Defense has established the main directorate for missile program support. However, there have been no official statements yet. It is worth recalling that at the beginning of May, during another meeting of the staff, President Zelensky tasked officials with accelerating the development of Ukrainian ballistic missiles as much as possible.
The task is to accelerate the creation of our Ukrainian ballistic missiles to the maximum extent. Our long-range capabilities are a clear and effective guarantee of security for Ukraine.
We are proud of our developers and hope to soon witness more than one successful use of powerful made-in-Ukraine weaponry. Now, let's talk about the situation at the front. Unfortunately, the Russians are putting pressure on the Sumy region. The situation on the border is escalating. The enemy is trying to expand the area of hostilities by exploiting weakly defended sections. According to deep state resources, the occupiers managed to break through near the village of Sadki.
The enemy has occupied Kindrativka and Oleksivka and has advanced near Bilovody, Loknya and Sadki.
The situation is truly critical, as the occupiers have managed to reach a distance of 20 kilometers from the city of Sumy in the area of Khotin. Deep state analysts know that over time, FPV drone strikes on the city can be expected once the appropriate crews are brought in. Residents of Sumy should already consider evacuating to safer regions, stated former General Staff spokesman Vladislav Seleznyov.
At the very least, children and the elderly should be taken to safer regions of the country, and people should be prepared to defend the city, because the enemy is carrying out Putin's orders.
But we also have some good news. Yesterday morning, in the Kursk direction, our forces took down a Russian Su-35 fighter jet. Also, Russia has occupied Staromykolaiivka and Hnativka in the Donetsk region. In addition, they have advanced near Troitsky. Also, the Russians have less than 600 meters left to reach the border of the Dnipropetrovsk region. In addition, the gray zone on the side of the Kursk region has disappeared, and the Russians have re-established control there. At the same time, the Telegraph reported that the capture of the entire Donetsk region is Putin's main goal during the summer offensive, and Kostiantynivka is the primary initial target.
Analysts expect that Russia will carry out offensive actions, but few believe it will be able to capture the entire region.
Our military, for their part, are trying to inflict losses on the enemy. The armed forces of Ukraine destroyed a Russian strongpoint with new Ukrainian munitions weighing over 100 kilograms. And finally, to wrap up this topic, a bit of the unexpected. While a Ukrainian drone was conducting reconnaissance, it flew into an abandoned building, and there was a different kind of military interaction inside. In short, Cupid brought them together. Well, see for yourself. Give a like to support our defenders. Let's not forget the high price our soldiers pay for every patch of land they reclaim. Russia officially claims that it did not abduct Ukrainian children. That's exactly what Maria Zakharova stated, adding that this topic should not be a subject of negotiations with Ukraine at all.
There are no Ukrainian children abducted by Russia. This must be the starting point when discussing the issue of children in Russian-Ukrainian contacts.
And that's not all. At the recent negotiations in Istanbul, the head of the Russian delegation, Vladimir Medinsky, also tried to downplay the scale of the crime. He claimed that there was no mass deportation and that it was only a matter of a few dozen children. So, according to their logic, it turns out that abducting children is acceptable as long as it's not too many. Additionally, the Russian negotiator Medinsky claimed that Ukraine allegedly unexpectedly postponed the exchange of bodies and prisoners, which the parties had agreed upon in Istanbul.
We have prepared more than 6,000 bodies of Ukrainian armed forces soldiers, which are being kept in refrigerated storage, frozen, and in special train cars, dressed in Ukrainian military uniforms, many of them with documents for transfer to the Ukrainian side. Lists have also been prepared of servicemen in the categories of wounded, seriously ill, and young those under 25 years old, about 1,200 people from each side in total, whom we are also currently ready to hand over to the Ukrainian side immediately. According to the schedule approved in Istanbul, the exchanges were supposed to begin today. Our representatives have arrived at the border at the exchange point. However, unfortunately, we still do not understand why there are no representatives from the Ukrainian side present there.
Meanwhile, the coordination headquarters for the treatment of prisoners of war states that the lists submitted by the Russians in Istanbul do not correspond to the agreements. The date for the repatriation of bodies was not coordinated, and Russia is acting unilaterally.
Unfortunately, instead of constructive dialogue, we are once again faced with manipulations and attempts to use sensitive humanitarian issues for informational purposes. We are interested in real results, in the return of our prisoners and the bodies of the deceased, and we are ready to continue working towards this within the agreed framework. We call on the Russian side to stop playing dirty games and return to constructive work for the return of people on both sides, and to clearly fulfill the agreement in the coming days.
Meanwhile, the first Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, Serhiy Kislitsa, spoke about how the Russians behaved during the negotiations.
At times, some members of the Russian delegation raised their voices. We remind them in particular, I reminded them not to raise their voices at us because we do not work for and will never work for the Moscow government.
And what do you think the Russians are trying to achieve? Write your thoughts in the comments.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
To lift sanctions from the aggressor, the White House is pressuring the Senate to ease sanctions against Russia. This is reported by the Wall Street Journal. Specifically, the Trump administration is pressuring Senator Lindsey Graham to soften his bill on sanctions against Russia. The White House is concerned that the bill could harm efforts to improve relations with Moscow.
Over the past few weeks, the White House and other Trump administration officials have quietly reached out to Graham's office, urging him to soften his bill, in particular by adding exceptions to the document that would allow the US president to choose whom or what the sanctions would target.
In addition, the sanctions bill has 82 co-sponsors in the Senate and provides for the imposition of sanctions against top Russian officials and sectors of the economy. The publication also reports that Lindsey Graham plans to introduce amendments to the bill to protect Ukraine's European allies, but will likely not support the changes being pushed by the Trump administration.
In turn, Lindsey Graham has publicly stated that he plans to introduce at least some amendments to the bill, specifically by adding language that would allow for the exclusion of countries that provide military or economic assistance to Ukraine. This provision is intended to protect Ukraine's European allies from the 500% tariffs that the document would impose on imported goods from any country that purchases Russian oil, gas, uranium, and other products.
Then, speaking in the Oval Office, Donald Trump told reporters the day before that the sanctions bill should not be considered without his direct approval. And such actions from Trump are entirely expected. This is also confirmed by his absolutely cynical statement, which he made after yet another Russian attack on Ukraine. Do you believe that sanctions against Russia could actually be lifted? Write your thoughts in the comments. Remember, Trump recently compared the war between Ukraine and Russia to a fight between two children in a park. Naturally, Ukrainian President Zelensky could not ignore such an absurd metaphor.
We are not children playing with Putin on a playground in the park. He is a murderer who came to that park to kill children. It's not about President Trump, but about anyone who is not here. In this country, thousands of miles away, they cannot fully feel or understand this pain.
Instead of Trump's completely senseless metaphor, I want to point out an obvious fact. Ukrainian children are dying in their beds, on playgrounds and in parks, including as a result of Russian terror. France will begin producing drones for the armed forces of Ukraine in Ukraine. French automotive and defense companies are planning to set up drone production directly on the territory of our country. This was announced by the French Minister of Defense.
Le Cornu did not specify the types of drones that will be produced, but confirmed that they will be intended primarily for Ukrainian military forces. At the same time, some of the drones will also be used to meet the needs of the French army for conducting exercises that take into account the realities of modern warfare.
And indeed, the French acknowledge Ukraine's success in the production and use of drones. And that is gratifying.
We will not be sending French people to work in Ukraine. That is not necessary. Ukrainians have a fantastic ability not only to create drones, but also to develop a new military doctrine for their use.
Ukraine is actively developing the field of unmanned systems. By 2025, it is planned to deploy more than 4.5 million drones, which, according to the General Staff, are already responsible for over 70% of enemy equipment destroyed on the front line. The private military company Wagner has announced the completion of its main mission in Mali and its return to Russia. The mercenaries stated that they had defeated the terrorists, trained the local army, and are now heading home with their heads held high. But that's just a facade. In reality, Wagner arrived in Mali at the end of 2021, after a military coup, when the new junta decided to expel the French and Western partners. And guess who they called for help? Yes, the Russians. But under the guise of fighting terrorism, mass repressions began killings of civilians, disappearances of activists, crackdowns on the opposition, and the seizure of mines. But Wagner's most notorious failure in Mali happened in July 2024 near the city of Tinza Autumn. Remember, their convoy was ambushed by Tuareg rebels. Jopi to Tarasov, Azavat, be Azov. At that moment, Azavat dead. What an absolutely incredible disaster of a mess this is. Allahu Akbar. In just a few days of fighting, more than 80 mercenaries were killed and dozens were taken prisoner. And here's the most interesting part. According to the Times, Ukrainian military personnel, specifically intelligence, may have been involved in this operation. Her hinted that the Tuaregs received precise intelligence, which allowed them to carefully plan the ambush. So the story of triumph in Mali looks more like a pretty wrapper for a shameful retreat. And what do you think? Why did the Russians really decide to leave Mali? This is the true face of Russian culture. On the Estonian-Russian border, the Russians set up a huge projector and displayed obscene words on buildings located on Estonian territory. And all of this just because Estonia wants to ban the Russian language. And now I'll speak for myself, because I've been to Estonia more than once and can describe the mood there. First of all, many Russians living there do not want to learn Estonian, the language of the country they live in. And secondly, Estonia is just as much a neighbor of Russia as Ukraine is. And Estonians have seen how Russians start wars, supposedly justifying it by protecting Russian speakers. So it's clear that Estonia doesn't want to see such defenders who are actually killers in their country. In occupied Mariupol, a Russian teacher was promised a free apartment if she would come to the nearly destroyed city to teach children. But of course, the Russians do not keep their promises. For those who don't know what I'm doing over there. Since the end of November 2024, I signed a contract for the Zemsky teacher program. I worked at a school of the Donetsk People's Republic in the city of Volnovakha. Yes, instead of an apartment, it was a terrible ruined building. But after the story got publicity, they did give me an apartment, but here's a new surprise. While the woman was traveling to Russia, this apartment was declared ownerless and simply taken away. But I wasn't one of those lucky people for whom everything goes smoothly in a new place. As I found out later, they saw me as a competitor and as someone who came to take away the hard-earned money that was being split among those who shared my position. Just like in the movies, they started pushing me out in all sorts of ways, and that's the end of the story. These are the Russian realities. Their own people have no qualms about betraying their own. Please like this video to support what we do, and be sure to subscribe to our channel Ukraine Today, so you don't miss the next episodes.